New educational chess game. I have white and I'm going to play the pawn to d4. My opponent plays knight to f6. I play the pawn to c4. And after that, I want to play knight to c3 and push it to e4. But he plays d5 immediately. So here, I'm going to exchange the pawn from the wing for the pawn in the center. And that's exactly why I played the pawn to c4, by the way. When he recaptures with the knight, pushing to e4, I establish a strong center of pawn. Certainly the knight on f6 attacks the pawn on e4, but we can defend with knight to c3. And we can also defend with bishop to d3, even though the bishop blocks the queen's defense of the pawn on d4. Why? Because after bishop to d3, if he takes the pawn on d4, there will be bishop to b5. Check, and then I can capture his queen. So I'm going to play bishop to d3. Now, a player of his strength would normally never, of course, take the pawn on d4. And he plays bishop to g4. Here, obviously, I can't take because of the knight, so I can play f3. I'm also considering queen to d3, taking advantage of his bishop's departure. From the light square to attack the pawn on b7. But then I leave the pawn on d4 undefended, meaning that queen to b3, queen takes d4, I take on b7, and if he takes the bishop, I can't go back to c8 because of the bishop, but I can take his rook, on the other hand. But his queen comes to d1 and checkmates me under the protection of the bishop, so I can't play this idea with queen b3. And here I'm simply going to play f3. I'm consolidating on the light squares, and maybe I'll play queen b3 a bit later. His bishop is attacked. He still can't take on d4 because of bishop to b5 check, and I reveal my queen's attack on his. If he goes to h5, I think his bishop will be a bit out of play because whether it's on h5 or g6, it's going to run into this too solid pawn structure. And I would go fight on the queen side, where in the end he'll have one less piece to defend the queen side, since his bishop will be on the king side, without any real prospects for play. By the way, he's thinking. Right now he's hesitating between bishop to h5 or bringing the bishop back to the diagonal. But the squares aren't very tempting. On e6, it blocks the pawn on 7 and the bishop has trouble playing. There could be this push to d5. On d7, that's maybe the best square, but it blocks the queen and sometimes the knight. And on c8, it's simply going back home. That might actually be a good choice, but players often have a hard time admitting their mistakes and going back home. So the bishop comes to h5. And here, I'll simply play knight to e2. I'm defending d4, and now my queen can go on the attack. So I have a strong center of pawn. But he's going to try to attack it. And since he plays e6, he's going to try to attack it with the c5 push. So I'll play bishop to e3 to strengthen control over the c5 square, to further increase my control over the c5 square with the pawn and the bishop. That way on c5, I take, and I've won a pawn. He's going to try to support this c5 push again. No, he plays c6. So he accepts the situation of a favorable pawn center for me. He should try to play dynamically to challenge this situation, but he's playing statically. He accepts the state of the position, which is in my favor. And that's a mistake. It's a mistake. Why? Because I'm actually going to consolidate. And soon he won't be able to attack at all anymore, my structure. And this structure gives me a space advantage. Well, I'm going to castle. I'm going to put my king in safety. But you still need to understand how you should play this structure. For now, I probably won't play on the king side, because as soon as I push the pawns to try to do things on the king side, his bishop could find a future again. Or maybe knight f4 to take his bishop of the white square. That's possible. Maybe I'll do that at some point. But otherwise, my goal is rather to play on the queen side for now. How to play on the queen side? Maybe place my rooks on the file, have good control over the file. With moves like a 3, b4, always maintaining good control of the c5 square and bringing my knight to that c5 outpost. With, for example, on 2, ndb3, ndc5, or ndc3 and 4, ndc5, he plays bishop e7. So I'm going to play n2. I leave the c2 file open. If he plays a move like b6, maybe rook c1, and the pawn on c6 will be weakened. Sure, the knight is defending, but it doesn't want to stay there all the time just to defend that knight. As for my move, knight f4, I'll wait for him to play h6. When he starts to play h6, I'll play knight f4, because at that point, surely he'll end up playing bishop g6. And after bishop g6, knight takes, he'll be forced to recapture with the pawn, which will weaken his white squares, especially this diagonal, because the pawn on f7 will no longer be there to defend 6, and so queen b3 will arrive with force. So I want to play this pawn to b4. For now, I'll play a3 to try to put this pawn on b4, still to keep control. 7-4-c5. Here, I'm really playing on my opponent's lack of space. He plays a 6. I don't know why. And on top of that, a 6 weakens the b6 square. And so his knight, since it doesn't have access to the c6 or 6 squares, will go to d7. And at some point, I've seen players play knight b6, thinking that the queen protects it. But you see, queen b3 could attack, and especially has the bishop in its sights. And this push to d5, which could happen at some point. So I played b4, and for now, I'm completely fixing my opponent's structure. The a5 square, the c5 square, the e5 square. Those are the lever squares that I absolutely have to control to prevent him from opening up the position. But actually, I didn't see it. He could play e5. I can't take them because I would lose my bishop. I take his knight anyway, but I would lose the other bishop afterwards. So that's a real threat on e5. I would probably play klb3, actually. I would let him take, I would recapture, and I would get a majority against his king. Because then I would have 4 pawns against 3 on the king side. So I can let e5 happen, but it's still unpleasant. If I can avoid it, I think I will. I'm going to play klb3. That way, after e5, I can take because the queen defends the bishop. kd7. So with kd7, he'll once again be looking to play e5. If I play e5 myself, I give him the d5 square, and I don't want that. It attacks my bishop as well, and it will leave him the bishop. g6, a possibility so that his bishop can play. So I'm going to play knight b3. If he wants to play e5, he'll play e5. I don't really want to oppose this e5 push too much. I'm still keeping control of the position, despite everything, despite this e5 push. Maybe put my queen on c2, my rook on d1. That way, in case of e5, there will be this rook-queen face-off. If the position opens up, it will rather be to the detriment of his queen. Sure, his queen will try to move, but it doesn't really have a very, very good square either. As we said, as soon as he plays h6, there will be knight f4. He plays knight e8. Why is he playing that? Maybe he wants to play f5 and try to give some play to his bishop on the white square. Can he play it? f5. I take. He takes back. Maybe I'll play queen to c2. Or else knight to c5. If the f-pawn advances, I take on e6. But after knight to c5, he'll take my knight, though. Well, listen. For now, I'll play queen to c2. I'm connecting my rooks. And I'm increasing control over the f5 square, so he can't play f5 right away. He plays knight c7. No. In the end, he's maneuvering with his knight, maybe aiming for the b5 square. We haven't exchanged much in this game, just a pawn. But you see, it's very strategic. It's square by square. So if I play knight to c5 and he takes me, I can either recapture with the pawn to open this file and attack the backward pawn. b7, or if he takes, recapture with this pawn and look for the d6 square, controlling that d6 square, putting the rook on the d file, and at some point trying to establish a bishop or a knight on d6. Or else I play rook to d1 as I had planned, to line it up with his queen. It's not easy to know exactly what to do here. Well, I'm still going to go to this c5 square. I don't have much time left on the clock. I need to try to force things a bit. He takes. How do I recapture? That's it. Normally, I should have thought about it beforehand. But recapturing with the pawn b isn't bad for attacking the backward pawn on b7. I'll watch for e5 breakthroughs. If pawn takes d, he plays bishop to f6, attacking rook, but my rook goes to d1. Well, I don't have much time, so I'll recapture with the pawn d on c5. I don't think it's the best move. But I'm opening this file for my rooks, and I want to play on the d6 square. I'm thinking that his kd7 doesn't have the d5 square, while I'm going to play on the d6 square. And I keep telling myself that his bishop on the light square can't get into play. My idea, actually, is to be able to establish a piece on d6, and if there's a capture, to recapture with the pawn and get a passed pawn that can be protected. By the way, which in my opinion is going to bother him a lot, that's really what I'm trying to do. Establishing a piece on the weak d6 square, it's a square he no longer controls, with 2 pawns anyway. He has a bishop on a dark square, but I also have a bishop on a dark square to establish control on this d6 square. And his queen lacks squares. As soon as there's rook to d1, he doesn't really know where to put the queen. He plays bishop to g6, which is pointless. I'm going to put a rook on the file. Now, if my bishop moves, the rook will attack his queen, so he'll have to move his queen. That's what happens. Queen to b8. And now maybe bishop to f4. He's going to play bishop to f6 to attack my rook. Maybe I should have put the other rook on d1. I kind of regret it now. Well, I'll play rook to d2 to leave the d1 square for this rook. I'm not very happy with my play here. He plays the pawn to f6. He wants to play e5 and bring his bishop back to f7 over there. So what should we play? Bishop to c4, attack e6. He's going to play bishop to f7, that's for sure. But as a result, he can't put his bishop on f6. That's the good news. He plays king to h8, breaking the pin. And we'll go into d7. We'll attack his bishop on the dark square right away. He comes to defend. All right, I'll double the rooks on the file. There might be a better move, but I don't really have time. He plays the pawn to e5. I'm going to play the queen to b3. I want to play bishop. f7. If he takes, I'll recapture with the queen. I want to destabilize his rook from protecting the bishop here. My knight absolutely needs to be improved in this position. He plays knight b5. And so bishop. f7 looks interesting here. All right, let's go. Bishop f7. We're breaking in. I know his knight is putting pressure on a3, and that as soon as my queen is no longer there, the knight will capture the pawn on a3. But I think I'm sneaking into his position. It's going to be more dangerous for him. I'm attacking the bishop twice. And if the bishop moves, there's a problem with capturing on b7 and capturing on g7. Afterwards, he can retreat to f8, but he'll still lose b7 and the other rook will be able to come in. And once again, it's the vertical domination that we need to convert horizontally. My rooks dominate the d-file. Now we need to transition to the 7th rank. On the other hand, my bishop on the black square and my knight are very badly placed. Now he plays knight to d4. And he resigns because now he's going to lose material. I just have to take his knight on d4 and win the bishop on e7. So how to take? Maybe not with my knight, actually, because then if we take, it would attack my bishop, but maybe with bishop takes. He takes back, and then he loses the bishop. And so the computer gives me 92% accuracy versus 84. That's a very good score, considering I'm playing a 10-minute game without increment, without any added time. So it's not easy to comment and play without even that little time bonus. I've got white, and I'll play pawn to e4. Instead of d4, I'm going e4. He plays e5, knight to f3 attacks e5, and knight to c6 defends. Now the Spanish, bishop to b5. He plays to d4. He immediately attacks my bishop on the white square. Well, looking at the board, I can move it back to c4, or take his knight as a matter of fact. I'm not sure which is better. I don't really like this defense. I'm not used to this defense with a and d4. I know it exists, but I haven't really studied it. It's going to make for an interesting game, actually. I think if I remember correctly, I should take his knight and then play c3. So I take his knight. And here, maybe play kingside castling first. You have to watch out for threats like queen g5, which could attack the bishop and the pawn on g2. So I'll kingside castling. So he plays bishop to c5. So he has doubled pawns, sure, but the pawn on d4 still bothers me. And if I play c3, he can take, freeing his bishop. But on the other hand, That will give me a strong center of pawn. I can recapture with the pawn on b2 to play d4 and have this center of pawn, or recapture with the knight to develop. So I'm going to play it anyway. c3 here. He's not obliged to take, by the way. He plays a 6. If I retreat to a 4, he's going to play against me. Maybe b5. Giving the b7 square to his bishop, I can retreat to c4, but there will always be b5. But then there will be bishop check as proof. King takes, queen to h5 check, and I get revenge on his bishop, which is unprotected. So I'm going to play bishop c4 to prepare the sacrifices. On f7 with this idea of a minor 5. He plays knight e7 and leaves me with this idea. You see, he didn't pay attention to the fact that the bishop was unprotected. So bishop takes on f7 check, king takes, queen to a 5 check, I take his bishop. And what if queen to a 5 right away, by the way? Because here, I'm threatening mate and I'm threatening his bishop. Maybe he'll play d5 against me. That's what he'll do, actually. So I prefer to play bishop. Takes on f7, check. I'm going to win a pawn in the sequence by breaking his king's castling. Besides, it's an important pawn. It's an f-pawn after all. For the safety of his king, apart from the fact that he's lost castling rights, it's going to be very interesting for me. He should have thought when the bishop was on c4, watch a bishop on this diagonal, ready to take on f7. So here I take his bishop. I'm attacking the pawn now. If he takes on c3, it's going to help me develop. Either I recapture with the pawn to free the bishop, or I recapture with the knight to develop my knight and play d4 afterwards. He plays d6, he attacks the queen and leaves me the pawn on d4. So now that's 2 extra pawns I have. I haven't lost a pawn, he's lost 2, and now his king is unable to castle. He plays c5, he's playing in a very impulsive way. You see, he spots the queen and can't help but attack her immediately. He's going to play c5. Well, right? All right, we'll pull her back to e3. Maybe other squares were better, but this is to support the d4 push. We also have a position with opposite-colored bishops. The key for me will be to manage to play with my bishop on the dark square. So I'd really like him to move the g7 pawn at some point so that my bishop on the dark square can take advantage. Diagonals are going to open up. He plays queen to b6. The c5 pawn is pinned. I can even push b4. It weakens his pawn structure on dark square. Play bishop to a3, threatening the c5 pawn. So let's play b4. He can't take or push because he loses the queen. So now he gives me the chance to start the fight on the dark squares. He plays a5, so I take c5. If he takes with the queen, we can also exchange queens with 2 extra pawns. The endgame is better for us. But he doesn't take with the queen, and now it's bishop to a3. And how is he going to defend a5 now? Knowing that a5 still can't advance because the queen would be captured. You see how here I managed to engage the fight on the black squares, while he does nothing with his bishop on the white squares. And on the black squares, there is no shortage of targets. There's the pawn on c5. There's the queen, but along the line of the bishop, there's the knight, and as the cherry on top, the king. A lot of weakness on the black square. So he plays queen to c6, and I can win the pawn on c5. He wants the pawn on e4. But I have to take on c5, that seems good. Now he plays b5. He wants to give the b7 square to his bishop. At least that's what I understand. Maybe play pawn to d4. And in any case, after bishop to b7, just to show you have to stay alert until the end, you absolutely must not play e5, because I open the diagonal and he'll play queen to g2, mate, because if I'm stronger on the dark squares, he is stronger on the light squares, of course. So after d4, bishop to b7, my idea was to be able to give checks with my queen. Since the bishop is protected, I can launch an attack with my queen. But the checks might not amount to much. I can also play d5. I can't attack his knight with queen g5. I lose my bishop. That's what's bothering me. I'm going to play the pawn to d4, and now no doubt he'll play bishop b7. He's going to bet everything on this attacking battery along the long white diagonal. There you go. He plays bishop b7. And now we can play d5, the queen defends, and then it pushes back his queen. Why not? We can even play d5, push back the queen, d6 to attack his knight that's moving, then d7 with the opening of the bishop, giving check to his king. That could be fun. Why not, actually? Let's have some fun. d5. Also, the pawn on d5, I'd rather not push it, as it blocks the diagonal of the bishop at white square. He plays queen g6. He still wants to target the weakness of the pawn on g2. So now let's calculate. d6, the knight moves. First, we need to know where it moves. No very good square for him. Let's imagine he comes to c6. d7 check, the bishop, the pawn controls. He only has the squares f7 and g8. f7, there will be checks with the queen, so I think he'll go to g8. All right, let's have some fun. So shall we play this move? d6. He moves d7 check. That's what we had planned. King f7, so he lets me give checks along the file. Well, shall we play anyway? Queen f4, check. The king on g8, that's a good thing. The rook won't take part in the fight. And after that, we'll look for something better. It's true that my knight isn't playing, nor are my rooks, so it's hard to win the game without even half of your pieces. He plays queen f6, so he proposes the exchange of queens. Okay, we can also exchange the queens and win this endgame. It's a bit of a shame, though. Otherwise, what move do I have? I have queen to g4. Watch out for moves like h5. He's going to throw all his forces into the battle. Queen to c7, that's not bad. Prepares the pawn push with check. We're attacking his bishop. That's what needs to be played. I'm breaking through on the black squares on the 7th rank. I'm attacking the bishop and lining up with the king, threatening the promotion of the pawn with the discovered attack, with this discovered check from the queen on the king. So he simply plays rook to the b8 square, but we deliver another queen check. So he comes to g6, and we have so many options. I don't even know what to play anymore. Everything looks interesting. We can also simply exchange the queens, take away his queen, and I still have mine. Let's play f4. Why f4? It's to play f7 check and push his king away from the area so my queen can come and attack him. You see, I had anticipated that he would come to attack my queen, but f5 check. And after that, my queen will be able to play against his king. If he goes to h6, queen f4 check, for example. If he goes to h5, queen takes h7. He goes to g5, queen g7, and we're not far from mate. So do we have a nice mate? Because here there are plenty of ways to checkmate, but is there a nicer one? If I play g4, he goes to h4, bishop f2. He goes to h3, I don't have mate. If I check him, he can take the pawn, so maybe that's not the nicest way. But on the other hand, we can play bishop f2 and then play g4 mate. That's the most fun because he's going to attack my queen for sure, but it's the pawn that will deliver the final blow, g4. The queen will protect the pawn attacks, the queen traps, and the bishop traps as well. We'll have an unstoppable mate with this push of the pawn to g4. Well, unstoppable, not exactly. He could play king to d5 actually, so that the king controls the g4 square. But anyway, even worse, I can play h3, then g4. He plays rook to h8. He didn't see it anyway. g4 mate. So here, it's an almost perfect game, with 98% accuracy versus 87% for my opponent. But this game was made easier by the fact that I was able to do this in the opening. Bishop takes on f7 check. Unto castle his king, then win back his bishop afterwards with the fork. And the score is very high because the position is very easy to play after that.